section is session 1. Not that that actually means anything, because for me this is session, I think, 56 of a number of times that we've been through these sessions. And this session looks at basically absorption costing. So there is going to be an element of assumption that you know what I'm talking about, but we'll take the same format as we always do, which is basically to look at some quick revision notes to make sure everyone sort of can visualize the problem. And we then focus on the nature of what will be task 4 in the assessment for those that are still going to see it. I know some have done it and are just waiting for their synoptic. Next week is actually task 5, which goes from this section or from this task and takes it a little bit further. And so I'll try and link the sessions together when we get to the end of this evening. So great. I'm going to be scribbling down some bits and pieces. My laptop has my camera in it, and therefore, as I put the laptop down, to save you looking at the ceiling, I am going to switch the camera off. I'll switch it back on again a little bit later on. Okay. Once we've been through those notes, we'll look at some practice tasks. You should have had them. If you've not had them, don't panic, just sit back and relax. The session is recorded. That will come out to you a little bit later this week after I get that. And hopefully attached will be the tasks for next week. So without any further ado, I should just say, if you are missing anything or you're concerned, please first check your junk, because if you are registered and you receive the email that says you're registered for the sessions, then automatically the recording and the task for next week will be sent out on that registration link. So please check your junk before you ask if you're missing something. All right, great. Contact details there if you need them, timhazardfi.co.uk. Please feel free to ping me anything that you like, even if it's just an email after you sat the exam saying, thanks, Tim, we got 98%. What did I do wrong? Great, fantastic. You've got a mobile number there as well. You probably won't want to ring me, but if you're doing any revision work, want a quick answer to something, use that, text me, WhatsApp me, and I'll do my best to get back to you as soon as possible. Okay, right, down goes my screen. Okay, the video is stopped, so don't be looking to see if you've broken something. I have indeed turned myself off, as it were, and let's get into our bridge session. That's not where I want to be. This is where I want to be. So we'll begin with a little sort of look at a few bits and pieces of notes, and then we're going to apply that to the tasks that were sent out for this week. All right. So task 4 is about, at the end of the day, as is task 5, a real major part of the syllabus, which is a system of costing, a form of costing called absorption costing. Okay, now this is sometimes also alternatively referred to as full costing for important reasons. Okay, now look, I'm just going to skim right the way down. Don't worry, it will come back. I'm going to skim down to this little diagram. I like this diagram. Okay, which talks about an overview of this thing called absorption costing, or full costing if you prefer. Now, the idea is this. I'm going to ask you a couple of things, so the chat panel is there for you. The idea is we are trying to work out the cost of something that we either manufacture, you know, so think about a manufacturing business, but it doesn't have to be a manufacturing company. It could be a service that we provide. And if you look through the AAT's practice assessments, you'll always see that one of them typically is a manufacturing business and one of them is some kind of service provision. And that is the case certainly in a lot of the tasks that we use, or that I use on these sessions over the various weeks. Now, the idea is, you know, down at the bottom here, we've got a cost unit. So look, think of that as something that we produce or we manufacture, and we basically want to know how much it costs. That's the whole point. There's various reasons why we might want to know how much it costs, but I'm not going to dwell on that at this point. We want to know how much something costs us. Great. And we manufacture it, let's say, to start with. So we can break the cost of producing something down into two distinct types of cost. We refer to direct and indirect costs. First question for you, quick revision question. What do we mean by a direct cost? What is that? So on the chat panel, for those that have got fastest fingers, what do we mean by a direct cost when it's at home? Okay, so Margot is saying, as an example, material, that would certainly, whoa, come on, pen. That would certainly be one. I'm seeing labour. Ah, right. Let me also, as I see them all running up, I can see labour, I can see overheads, I can see all sorts of things coming in there. Right. Oh, I see production labour, materials. Excellent. So Margot, thanks. And Jenna and Ramesh and Vazia. Oh, my word, I can't keep up with my chat panel, but that's all good, isn't it? Fantastic. Great. So the examples that you are giving me, I'm liking. Let me just put them there. Okay. So we talk about materials, we talk about labour. Elena, you're saying costs relating to the production of a unit. Yep, but so are indirect costs. So look at that overall picture. What makes a direct cost a direct cost? The important thing is, and it was mentioned specifically by Jenna on the chat panel. Well done to you, Jenna. These are costs that you can trace to specific units of production. That's what these are. Okay. And so, you know, depending on what you want the example to be, this might be, you know, if you think about a manufacturer of cars, what sort of materials go onto a car? Well, I'll make them up. Don't worry about telling me how to make a car. But what I'm going to suggest is, for instance, if it's a car, then there will be some wheels that go on it, won't there? And that would be part of the materials. You can trace maybe 4 wheels to each car. You can directly see the wheel cost going into each individual car, for instance. And then there's all sorts of other materials, of course. Sure there is. Great. So that's your materials as an example. And of course, there would be perhaps someone on the production line. So the person fitting the wheels. Now, don't tell me a machine does it. Person fitting the wheels to a car. Well, in that instance, we know, because they do it all the time, that it takes them 15 minutes to put the 4 wheels onto a car. And that 15 minutes of their time can be traced directly to each individual car. So it can. And there might be some other direct costs, but at the end of the day, the 2 things for this syllabus in terms of direct costs are going to be the materials that we can trace and the labour time that we can directly trace to each individual unit. Depending who you study with, you get different examples in your material. I've used a car one. You might use a bakery. So in bakery, you have the person doing the kneading of the dough and the baking. You also have the wheat and the flour and the eggs and whatever else goes into baking products. Great. Directly traceable to each individual unit of output that we produce. Great, fantastic. Okay. Then we've got indirect costs, which I don't need you to tell me, they can't be traced directly to each individual unit that we produce. Okay. So what we're going to have to do is basically share these amongst the units that we produce. So we can't trace them directly. So in some way, we're going to have to guesstimate how much of these relates to each of the things that we produce. And this is the job that we've got. Okay. There is another phrase. It appears kind of sort of quite frequently, but not on this page just at the moment. Another word that we use for indirect costs. Popular word beginning with O. Margot is in there. Great. Super. So Rosie's there as well. Well done. We're talking about overheads. Great. And so, you know, when we think of Claudine as well is in there with overheads, you know, let me perhaps give you some examples of indirect costs. So fantastic. The person fitting the wheels a minute ago over here was spending their time directly working on individual units of production. But if I compare that to, let's say, a supervisor, Jenny's in there as well, fantastic. You've got a supervisor wandering around, tutting and just observing and being around in case there's an issue. You can't trace their time to specific units of production. And so we're going to have to, in some way, kind of share it, spread the love, as it were. So we're going to have to get that cost into a cost of production, but we can't just pin it straight on the donkey, if you like. We're going to have to go through a process of sort of sucking it up, as we'll see in a minute. Great, fantastic. So also things like the sort of rent and rates and things like that. You know, we can't operate without, exactly, Margaret, we can't operate without a factory. We have to pay rent, we have to pay rates, all of that kind of stuff. And that's all part of the cost of producing whatever it is we produce, the cars, the cakes, the bread, whatever example you want to use. So again, we still need to stick it onto the cost, but you can't just go and pin it on because you can't directly trace it. So hopefully, again, you just get this kind of image in your mind of the problem that we have. So in an absorption costing system, which remember is called full costing, we want to make sure that we include all of the costs of production, whether we can trace them directly or not, whether they're fixed or variable. We want to get them into the cost of this thing at the end of the day. Now, there's another system, marginal costing, that doesn't do it like that, and that's in a later unit. But this one is all about making sure that we have all of the costs considered. Great. So how do we do this? Well, as you can see from the diagram, if they're direct costs, they're going to go straight onto the cost unit. So that's not a problem. You know, that's simple at the end of the day. And that's not what this task is about. This task is about how do we get these other indirect or overheads into the cost units as well. Fantastic. So there's a process, and it's not a bad idea that you understand the process. Okay. So we are going to take these overheads and we are firstly going to either allocate them or apportion them to the centres that they relate to. Now, cost centre, different names you might see for it at the end of the day. Don't let that put you off. We're talking about bits of our business that we would separately identify. Normally, and we'll see it on the other page in a minute, we would have production centres. So on this little example, assembly and painting are production centres. I would say to you, think about production centres in a manufacturing business as places where this output, this thing that we produce, they pass through it, i.e. also, I mean, go back into the day where there were assemblies and production lines where people stood there doing stuff. Yeah. And so the thing that we manufacture spends a bit of time in the assembly room, spends a bit of time in the painting room. But you know what? This car, maybe, that we're producing, the car does not go into the canteen. But you know what? The people that do the stuff go into the canteen. So there's more cost associated with this. And yeah, again, we tend to refer to these as service centres. And you might see a lot more, not just the canteen, things like a maintenance department, a stores department, and things like this. The output doesn't go through the maintenance department, but obviously it has a function at the end of the day that helps, you know, maintain the equipment in the assembly room or the painting machinery or whatever it happens to be. Great, superb. So when we say allocate, this technically means give it, because some of these overheads will be obvious and relate specifically, say, to assembly or painting or canteen. So great, we can just give it to them. Alternatively, if we can't see that direct, I don't want to use that word direct, right? If we can't see that obvious link to a particular center, then we'll need to share it. And that's what we mean by apportionment. So sharing it out across the different cost centers. Great, fantastic. Ultimately, once we've done that, the next step, second step, is to reapportion service costs. So the idea here is that any cost that is sitting in the canteen, which will be various things at the end of the day, rent and rates that are attributable to the canteen, for instance, you know, all of that kind of stuff. At the end of the day, the things that we produce, think about it like that. The units that we produce spend some time in the assembly department, they spend some time in painting, and we want them, whilst they're in there, to pick up some of this cost. So anything that is in the canteen, we need to reapportion, reshare to the assembly and the painting department on this illustration, so that when the units of production are in assembly, they're going to pick up some of the overall overhead cost. When they're in painting, they're going to pick up some of that overall cost. Now, tasks 1 and 2 together, or steps, I should say, steps 1 and 2 together are task 4 in the assessment, and then they will get you in task 5 in your assessment to play with the absorption of these indirect costs. Now, again, I've always liked a picture of absorbing. I don't know whether you subscribe to visuals, but the visual I always use is like fish and chip shop. So look, that's, I know it's pretty bad, that's a fish, okay? And what you've got here is flour, and what you've got here is batter. Whoa. And if ever you go to a fish and chip shop and you say, I'd like some freshly cooked fish, please, what they'll do is the person behind the counter will take a nice piece of fish and they'll dip it in the flour. Now, I like you to think that that's our output, our manufacturing process, being perhaps in the assembly department. Whoa. And when it's in there, when you dip it in the flour, some of the flour sticks to the fish. Of course, what I'm talking about is some of this overhead cost sticks to the unit of production. We call it absorbing. And then when it comes out of the flour, you know what happens? They then dip it in the batter. And of course, now this is our units of output in the painting department. And when they're in there, they're going to pick up some more of this overhead cost. Or in my picture, it's going to come out of there with a load of batter on it. And then, of course, boom, it goes off into the fryer, which is our, you know, that's our manufactured output, if you like. So that's my view of absorbing overheads. Basically, we've got to get all of our costs into the flour pot and into the batter tray, such that when our units of output get dipped into them, they'll take some of that cost with them, absorbing those overheads as they go through the manufacturing process. That's what it's all about. That's what we're going to do. Fantastic. So look, that was an overall view of it. I've been through most of these things. So just a couple of things that I would add here. Production cost centers. Yeah, just be careful when we talk about production cost. This tends to be specific for a manufacturer, but do appreciate that not everybody manufactures goods that they then sell. Okay. And so, you know, do appreciate that this is what we do. All right. This is what we do. And if it's making cars, then we might call them production cost centers. As I said to you before, think about it, that the physical units of production flow through those particular areas. Marvelous. Then we've got service cost centers. Again, another phrase that I probably would say, just to make sure that you don't get tied into it, must be called one thing. What we're talking about here are bits of the business that support the things that we do. So the canteen a minute ago was an obvious one. Now, the canteen was obvious. It supports everything we do because, of course, people go in there to eat in between their shifts and things like that. I mentioned maintenance. Machinery's got to be maintained. I mentioned stores. The raw materials need to be issued into production. So this is fine, but don't be shocked if they don't call it a production cost center or a service cost center. If they talk about support, they might talk about a service even that we do. So what we do could be a service. So I don't want the word service to be misconstrued when you're reading through the scenario that they give. There's what we do, and then there's the support, okay? And that's the most important part. Great, we've mentioned already what these things are about. So allocation, if it's a single center that we can identify. Apportionment is sharing. So splitting, sharing, and they'll always tell you you've got to do it on a meaningful basis. And we'll see that in a moment. Great. The second part, of course, was reapportionment. And the concept there, of course, was getting those overheads into the areas that the fish is going to get dipped in, that the manufactured goods are going to pass through, if you like. Now, there's two ways of dealing with that, and we'll come back to that in a moment. Okay, so here we go. This week's first task was this one. It's a central bus company. Okay, so actually this business doesn't make buses. It's not manufacturing something. What it does is it basically drives people around, and you'll see in a minute that there are some, if you like, different types of service that this bus company provides. Now look, it's talking about 2 profit centers and 3 cost centers. Okay, be prepared for different terminology. The 2 profit centers, this is the what we do, but they don't manufacture anything, you see. So this is what they do. The 3 cost centers, these are the support functions. And I know sometimes when people do practice questions, you go on to the AAT assessments and there's a slightly different wording, possibly it's laid out a little bit differently, and that throws people. What I'd say is if you understand the problem and the process, it doesn't matter whether they call them, Adam and Eve, we know what they're talking about. So what have we got? We've got some budgeted overheads here on the left, and we've got lots of additional information about the business. So let's have a look at the business first. The profit centers. This is what we do. So they've got scheduled services. So they run some scheduled bus services. Great. And they've got contract services, which presumably is some kind of bespoke, well, you hire my bus and we'll take you where you want to go, that kind of thing. Then they've got their support cost centers. So again, you sort of see the makeup of that. So as you might have expected, maintenance and repairs of the vehicles, and then a fuel and parts store, and then some general admin down at the bottom here. Great. And what we've been provided with, which is again what you'll get, is some information about different aspects of these centers. And you'll see we've got here, whoa, lovely, and liking that, the carrying amount of the buses, i.e. in the financial statements, how much those buses are carried at, valued at in the balance sheet. And you'll see there's a lot more buses in the scheduled services than there is, excuse me, in the contract services. Or either that or the scheduled services ones are a lot bigger, or the ones in the scheduled services are very exquisite buses, which you wouldn't think, would you? So obviously there's more buses in the scheduled services. What about the number of miles that are scheduled to be driven? And you see the number of miles there again. This is what we do. We don't make stuff, but we drive people about. Boom. You've also been given floor space in square meters. Now, again, if you're driving buses around, the floor space is unlikely to be relevant to that, if you get what I mean. But if we were a factory with canteens and stuff, that would become even more important. But there's some floor space taken up by the maintenance department, the fuel and parts stores down here, and the general admin function. There's also a number of indirect employees. Now, remember, if we were talking about indirect employees here, this is not the bus drivers, is it? Do you get what I mean? This is not the bus drivers, because if they were bus drivers, we could link them, trace it directly to the scheduled services. Okay, so a lot of information about the business, what it looks like, what we do, how it's constructed, if you like. And then alongside, we've got all of these overheads. These are, you know, the batter and the flour that we want the fish to pick up as it goes through. In this case, it's not a fish, it's various scheduled services and contract services. So what have we been given? We've been given depreciation charge for buses. Nice. Diesel and other variable overheads, presumably the diesel being the most significant in there. Rent and rates of the premises, light, heat and power of the premises. And then we've got indirect labour costs. So indirect labour costs will be, of course, not the bus drivers, okay, but we've got the vehicle and maintenance, the repairs people, quite a lot of them working in there, it would look like, other than, or they've got a decent salary by the looks of it. Nice. We've got the people running, looking after the fuel and parts store, and we've got the general admin, which, wow, I mean, blimey, if you were looking to cost save there, I think I can spot some. So all of that is added up, and you've got an indirect labour cost there. Great. So the job at the end of the day is all about, and you know, if I can be so bold as just to draw it, we've got to take all of this overhead cost here, and ultimately we've got to link it to what we do. So all of this overhead cost has got to in some way get into the cost of providing scheduled services and providing contract services. Okay, the flour and the batter, if you like, in a manufacturing type setup. What else do we get from it then? So it says overheads are allocated or apportioned on the most appropriate basis. Yep, we ain't going to do it on the least appropriate, are you? The total overheads of the 3 support departments are then reapportioned to the 2 bus service profit centres, what we do, using a direct method. Now, you might not know what that means, I hope you do, but we'll compare what it means to something else after this task. So here it is, it's now telling us about these support centres. So the first one, here you go, number 1, 75% of the vehicle maintenance and repairs time is spent maintaining buses in the scheduled services profit centre, and the remainder is in the contract services. So effectively it's saying you've got 2 different types of product. All right, it's a service, but you know, let's call it a product, and 75% of that support division is spent on the scheduled services. 25% is the rest, obviously, is spent on the contract services. The next one down says the fuel and department store. Well, they make 70% of what they do to the scheduled services and the remainder to contract services. So again, the remainder would be 30. And then finally, of course, we've got our general admin, and that can be split. It said 60%, sorry, no, it doesn't, 65% to scheduled services and 35% to contract services. Now, why they decided to tell you the 65 and 35, but not the 70 and 30, 75 and 25 is beyond me. But nonetheless, you know, I'm sure we can work out the missing bit from 100%. There is no reciprocal servicing between the 3 support cost centres. So what that means is general admin doesn't do anything for the fuel and parts store or the maintenance and repairs. It means the maintenance and repair department doesn't do anything for the parts store or the general admin people. It means that the fuel and parts store doesn't do anything for the maintenance, etc. So none of these 3 do anything for each other. Everything that they do is to support the two products, if you like. And for those that are aware, the direct method is what it is because there is no reciprocal servicing. And we'll make sure that you understand that at the end as well. So here we go. Going to use the table to allocate or apportion the overheads using the most appropriate basis. So, of course, you've got your two, let's call them, I'm going to call this P1, production 1 and production 2, and support 1, support 2, and support 3. Okay, just to, again, just try and make sure everyone's comfortable with the terminology. Now, I've not given you an offer here, but the drop-down selections will give you a choice of things. And do you know what? This really annoys me so much that I complain to the AAT about it, because on the basis of apportionment, and there you go, I have written them down at the bottom this time, this is what it gave you as your choice. Allocated, or carrying amount of buses, or floor space, or mileage, or the employee numbers, i.e. what it gave you was all of these things up here, the carrying amount of the buses, the planned number of miles, you know, the floor space, the employees, etc. But it also gave you allocated. Now, allocated is not apportioned. And I got very irritated that it said basis of apportionment here, because it should say really allocated or basis of apportionment. That's what it should say. You can't allocate and apportion. They are different things. Anyway, that's me on my sort of high horse getting irritated. So let's go through with it then. I'm going to take the figure of, and I'll tick it off as I pick it up, okay? So I'm going to take the depreciation charge for buses, 2,360,000, okay? 2,360,000. I'm going to stick that at the end here, and it's very difficult for me to write that in because it's a bit small, but let me just puff that up a bit. There you go. So 2,360,000 is going to go in there, okay? How do you think we are going to deal with that? We need this 2,360,000 ultimately to be in the scheduled services and the contract services. Clearly, the buses are not in these other three support centres. So on what basis would you suggest we need to apportion the depreciation on the buses? Carrying amounts, great, carrying amount. So basically, you would click your drop-down menu and it would say carrying value of buses or something like that. Anyway, I can't quite squeeze it all in. But now you'd then have to do your computations. Now, I'm not going to scribble every single computation down, but let's just make sure that everyone is comfortable with it. If we're going to do it on carrying amount of buses, this is the total carrying amount of the buses. And you've got obviously this one for scheduled services. In fact, let me just call it P1. And you've got this one for P2. Okay. So to work out the split of that, some people I know like to work these out as percentages. Some people don't care for it. Some people just bang out the calculation. So let me get to the bottom where I've got some space and let me do the calculation. And you tell me whether, of course, you can tell me what the answer is, so I don't need to get my calculator out. So I need to take that 2,360,000 and into P1, I need to put, don't I, a proportion of that. And the proportion would be, double check my numbers as I pull them out. But basically, I want to put in there 22,104,000. And let me just come back and check it once. 22,104,000 out of the 30,700 million, 30,700,000, whatever it is, out of that total needs to go into P1. Okay, so let me pop that on there. What was it? 30,700,000. Okay. Now, I know some people say, Tim, you should do it like this. Some people prefer me to do it like this. 2,360,000 across the 30,700,000 multiplied by 22,104. I don't care which way you lay it out. It really doesn't matter. But perhaps you'd be kind enough, whichever way we do that, perhaps you'd be kind enough to tell me what that number comes out to be. Elena's there with a 1,699,200, but Elena has she is the only person to have put anything in the chat panel. I cannot work with just one person. Oh, okay, Zara is going in there, possibly just dropping off the figures at the bottom, the last few digits. Jenna is agreeing, Rosie is agreeing. Excellent. I was about to get my calculator out and then you popped it on there, so that's good. Fantastic, like it. Okay, so 1,699,200. Okay, so fine. Okay, 1,699,200. Now, as I said, some people like to work these out as a percentage, and if you were to do that, I think I'm right in saying that what it's saying is, in the carrying values, 72% of the carrying value of buses is this scheduled services or whatever it is. Okay, now don't round anything unless they tell you to round it. Okay, so no rounding unless it says otherwise. Look here, this is pounds, not thousands, so we would need to be precise. Zara, I thought you might be asking that, so that is what I've put. Great. So I can't really fit it in particularly well, but anyway, 1,699,000. What did you say? 200, wasn't it, at the end? That number, something like that. No worries. Excellent, Claudine. So nice one. Look, then if you want, and you really do want to, you do the same thing for production centre 2, which is what their contract services. How much of this 2,306,000? And you could say, Tim, it's just the rest of it, but check it. Okay, check it. Don't be in a hurry. Just make sure we don't make mistakes. So, okay, now I want, and I'm going to separately calculate it. This is what I would recommend that you did by looking back at the table. Okay, so back at the table, I see, don't I, the 8,596,000 carrying values of the buses. Boom. Out of that total of 3,700. Okay, pump it into your calculator, check it, and you get 6,800. I'm bid on the chat panel. Jenna's saying that, Helen is saying that, Valerie is saying that, Margot is saying that. Fantastic, super, lovely. Elena is saying it. And then, okay, we pop it in. And Claudine is saying it. So we pop it in here, 660,800. I've calculated those two things independently. Let's pop some noughts in there. And I've got something to say there as well. Okay, check that you've done it. So look, that's the total. You did this independently. You then calculated this independently. Check that they come to your total. Don't be tempted to calculate the first one and then just put the rest in the other one, because if you've got the first one wrong, you've got the second one wrong. So check them. Okay, check them. Superb. Excellent. Let's move down to diesel fuel and other variable overheads then. Okay, so diesel fuel and other variable overheads. Let me tick it as I pick it up. 1,687,600. Okay, so in it goes, 1,687,600. So we pop the total in. Great. So on what basis do you think we should get that into P1 and P2? Of course. Yeah, I'm guessing that diesel is pretty much going to be linked to how many miles you drive, and other variable overheads therefore likely to be linked, I would suggest, to the mileage that those buses, just whatever you do in a bus, what do you do? Drive, that's what you do, isn't it? So Jenna, I agree with your planned miles. Claudine, I agree with your planned miles. So let me drop that in there, planned mileage, okie dokie. And then it's a case, isn't it, Zara, agree with you as well. It's now a case of doing very similar computations, but we've now got a total planned mileage of 50,800 miles. And then, of course, 37,084 of them are P1, the scheduled services. 13,716 of them are, of course, then for the contract services. So, yep, you do the computations. I'm not going to write them all down because, of course, that will take ages. By the way, this figure is 73%. So rather unimaginative, but anyway. So let me know if you're not comfortable, but the principle, of course, is exactly the same as what we had a minute ago. So I can see that the figure being offered firstly is 1231948. I concur with that. That is the right number. And, you know, again, separately calculating it when you're in the assessment. So 13,716 out of the 50,800, that proportion relates to the contract services. And again, I'm seeing a figure of 455,652. I can concur with that. That is the right number. Independently calculate them. Check it to the total. Don't move on until you're there. You know, make sure you've got that right. I'll put some zeros here. Now, another thing, again, most of you know I'm about to say it, but sometimes they'll tell you to put a zero. Okay, so Ramesh, here is my comment. Most people that have been on before will know exactly what this is. Boom, Claudine, absolutely. Read the full question because they will tell you whether you need to put a zero in a blank box or whether you should put a dash in it. When you have negative numbers, whether you should put a minus sign or whether you should put brackets or whether you could do both or neither. They'll tell you if they want rounding and to how many decimal places. So make sure that you read the full question, because what really irritates me is that for great students that know what they're doing, just forget to put the third or fourth decimal place in, or forget to put zeros when it says to do that, and it will mark you wrong. And for all the wrong reasons, we possibly end up looking at have to resit this thing, and we don't want to be doing that. Okay. Oh, can you use translator during the exam? Claudine got caught out with it. When you say translator, I'm not entirely sure what you're referring to in terms of the exam itself, Margot. Yeah, because at the end of the day, you will only be able to type into cells that they want you to type into. But if they want you to type in a zero and you don't, it will mark it wrong. So you've got to be, you know, following the instruction that's there. You can't type into boxes that they don't want any typing in. Let's put it that way. All right. Do you know what, Margot? I don't know the answer to that, but I don't think it's available to you in the exam, and certainly they won't let you take anything in that might have that on it. So yeah, you should be okay, because most of the words that you have are going to be drop down menus, so it's unlikely that you're putting too many words in that aren't there on a drop down menu for you. Again, Google Translator won't be there. The machines that you're sitting on shouldn't have access to the internet, so no, typically. All right. Okie dokie, let's just plow on then. So we've then got the rent and rates, which is 408,000. Let's pop that in as well. So I'll pop it in my total column first. The colours don't really mean anything. It's just whatever pen I've got running at the time. How do you reckon rent and rates? I think it's fairly obvious, isn't it, how we would get that out there? Floor space. Okay, I'm liking that. So definitely floor space. Everyone's on the floor space thing. Great. So we click the drop down menu and we select the floor space. Now, I hope it's clear then that clearly we don't, nothing's going to be going into P1 and P2 in respect of that because they're buses and services. But of course, what we know is the maintenance and the fuel and parts store and the general admin department, all of those things at the end of the day take up some floor space in it. So here we go. There's 34,800 square meters, of which 21,924 square meters is S1, of course, as we referred to it. And then the fuel and parts is 7,656, which is service 2, and 5,220 for your general admin. So yeah, same principle then. The proportions of that total will need to be calculated in exactly the same way. And I'm seeing some figures and I will tell you whether I concur with them or not. I like for the maintenance department 257040. Okay, that is the right number that I saw going up the screen. I can see another one appearing. Margot is suggesting 89,760 for the fuel and parts, and is suggesting 61,200 for the general admin. Now you should calculate in the exam those three things independently. Okay, Elena, agreed. Independently, then check that they add up to your total. Okay, and then you're fairly comfortable that you've done it right. Please let me know if you don't understand any of those computations. They're all done on exactly the same basis as the first one. Obviously, the relevant proportions are being derived from this detail at the top in terms of carrying amount of buses, mileage, and now, of course, the square meterage, the floor space in those departments. Great. Okie dokie. Another one then, let's pick it up. 166,400 is the light, heat and power. So 166,400. You will be provided with stuff for scribbling in. You can't take anything in with you though, Ramesh. So you shouldn't be taking anything in which could in theory conceal notes and stuff like that. But if you ask for rough paper, you'll get some rough paper to scribble on. We will at our exam centre anyway. Okay, so my question to you then is this: how are we going to get the light, heat and power of the premises allocated between, well, effectively the premises is occupied by the supports, isn't it? Okay, so how are we going to do that? And what you might be thinking is, hang on, I'm running out now because I've done this one, I've done this one, I've done this one. And it's very tempting that, oh, I must have to use the next one. But the number of employees isn't really relevant to a light, heat and power. You're absolutely right. Everyone that's popped on the screen, you're suggesting floor space. And once again, I would agree with you. So, you know, don't be shocked if you end up using the same thing again. You know, this obviously indicates, this is an AAT one, by the way. So, you know, it obviously indicates that they like to play with it. So, all right, noughts in here, exactly the same proportions then, because we're using the floor space to allocate it again. So the relevant proportions will go into S1, S2 and S3. Again, let me just treble say it. So we're going to take 21,924 from the total of 34,800. That proportion of the 166,400 will go to S1 and then S2 and S3 in exactly the same way that you shared that out. Now, as I said, let me know if you don't understand where any of the computations come from, but it will take me an age to write them all out as we do it, but happy to otherwise if you need it. So Anyone want to tell me what they got? Because ideally, you've had a crack at this before today. Okay, which bit there, Margot, did you want me to repeat? The calculation? Yep. Okay, let me just do another one of the calculations then. So what is this one? This is light, heat and power. Okay, just once more, Judy, no worries, here I come. So I am taking, for light, heat and power, we're using the floor space. So the figures of floor space were, correct me if I'm wrong, for S1, 21, and in fact, let me put the total figure in first. We're trying to split £166,400, and I'm going to give this proportion 21,924 meters of of floor space in the maintenance department, out of a total of 34,800 meters of floor space in all of the departments. Okay, so this is S1, of course, and this is all of them. It's that proportion. Okay, which I think is, looking at the numbers on the screen, I will of course only write them in if they are right. 104,832, I like that. S2 is going to get their proportion, which is 7,656 square meters in S2. That proportion of the total space that's occupied, which comes out to be 36,608, absolutely correct. And S3, exactly the same basis, but S3's floor space is 5,220 meters out of the total of 34,800 square meters. And so that proportion of the 166,400 is indeed 24,960. Margot, no worries. Judy, no worries. There you go. That's how the numbers are calculated. Same principle, of course, all the way through. So let me just pop them straight in then. So no worries, no worries. That's what we're here for. It would be awful if you didn't ask me anything. 104. Kelly, hurrah, hooray, excellent, superb. Oh, it's like a light bulb moment. Fantastic. I'm loving it. I'll just pop these figures in lest I forget them. 36,608, and then we've got what, 24,960 there, wasn't it? Remember, calculate them independently like that. So I've just calculated them, transfer them into your table, of course, and check that it comes to the total. Check the 3 that you're putting in comes to what you expect it to be. All right. And then we've got one bit left. Well, one bit left in the initial allocation and apportionment, and that's the indirect labor. Okay, and yeah, there's a bit of a red herring here, because whilst we've been given the number of indirect employees, when we look over here at the indirect labor cost, you can see what it relates to. This is S1, this is S2, this is S3. And, you know, the numbers of people are not really relevant, are they? On the basis that, you know, maintenance people probably get paid completely different to stores people, to etc., etc. And so we've actually got a piece of information that isn't necessary. And that's really quite rare, to be honest. But it's a good test that you understand when you allocate. If it's got the name on it, you allocate it. Okay, so that's it. Vehicle maintenance and repairs, that's where it's going. So that is an allocate option, absolutely. So this is allocated, and that's where I got a little bit upset, because basis of apportionment isn't really an allocation, you know, it's an allocation. But anyway, you know, that's me and a high horse, isn't it? Off they come. So we just copy them straight in. 430,600, wasn't it? I'm copying them off yours, Claudine. Hopefully you've written them down correctly. 198,352, boom, and 528,400. Way too much indirect labour in the admin there. Coming to a total of 1,157,352. And as I said, you know, obviously check it, but just check you've copied them across correctly. Okay, so we then add them up. Okay, so literally, and really it should do it for you, but I'm going to add up everything that we've got in all 5 centres at this point in time. Okay, so literally I'm just adding up these columns. Okay, so there's no prizes for that, but what you should find is this one will be 2,931,148. P2 will come to, at this point, 1,116,452. Great. S1 has only got those bottom 3 things. The total in there at this stage should be 792,472. The total in S2 at this point is 324,720. And then the total in S3, these 3 things here, should be 614,560. And then you see, you should add these together. Just check that when you add that together, and I get this number when I do that, 5779352. Obviously check that when you add down the total column, you get this number. Check that when you add these across the table, you get that number. And even more importantly, check that that number, well, they haven't done it for us, but had they have added this up in the first instance, check that it agrees with the total of those overheads. And it wouldn't be a bad thing on your calculator just to double check it. But of course, you know, bottom line, you have ways of checking that there's no obvious mistake. All right. Great. So that is allocation and apportionment, or in this case, it was lots of apportionment and a bit of allocation. Once we've done that, remember, and if I might be so bold as, you know, just linking you back to what we talked about before, what we've now got to do is we've got to get the costs which have found their way into the service or support centres. We've got to get those into the production centres, or in this case, obviously, it's not manufacturing, but it's getting, if you like, the canteen costs into the painting department, the construction or manufacturing department, whatever they might be called. All right. And so this is this stage here then, isn't it, where it said 75% of the vehicle maintenance and repairs is done for scheduled, the remainder is contract services. So what I'm going to do here is literally just, this is a working, you can't scribble in them, of course. All right, but I'm going to just put the percentages in here. All right, so this is P1 and P2 just as a working, and it says the maintenance department spends 75% of its time for P1, which must mean 25% of it is for P2, of course. Just double check that I've pulled that correctly. 75% and therefore 25%. So literally, I am now going to take the 792,472 that is in the maintenance department, and I'm going to share it, reapportion it between P1 and P2 on this basis. So again, this is, Ramesh, where we talked about basically, having to read what the question says, read whether it tells you to use brackets or minus signs or anything like that at the end of the day. All right, great. And so literally 75% of the 792,472 needs to find its way into P1. And I can see the figures going on the screen, so let me put them on. 594,354. I'll only put them on if I agree with them, of course. And 198,118. Indeed. Everyone okay that that is 75% of the 792,472 and 25% of the 792,472. Okay, so I've not shown the workings for it, but it is effectively those percentages there. I'm going to do exactly the same. Take the 324,720 that is in our fuel and parts store, and I'm going to reapportion it based on what the question says. And I've kind of forgotten. I think it said, yep, it said 70% of its activity is for P1, which of course means 30% of its activity was for P2, i.e. scheduled services and contract services. So 70% of the 324,720, that figure I see on the screen, 227,304. I agree, that is correct, 70%. And the other 30%, 97,416. And you know what I'm going to say? Do them independently. Take 70% of it, pop it in here. Take 30% of it, pop it in there, and check that these two are the same as that. Check that these two are the total there. Don't do anything silly. You know, take your opportunities to check everything. Boom. The last one, we're going to take the 614,560 that found its way into whatever that was, the general admin, and we're going to dish it out between P1 and P2. If you recall, they decided to tell us this was 65% to P1 and 35% to P2. Cool. So do them independently. 65% of 614,560. I can see it going up the screen. I concur with 399,464. That's the correct answer. And then 35% of the 614,560. We dish that beast out. And again, 215, I'm seeing 096. I concur with that answer indeed. Elena and Claudine and Jenna and Zara, who have popped that on the screen, and a big shout out to everybody that's popping their figures onto the screen. Calculate them independently, check that they add up to this figure. You know, just check it. You've got ages in the exam to make sure that you've done everything accurately. Okie doke. And then finally, then you add it up. So I'm going to take the total here and add on these reapportioned support services. And I'm going to take the total, wrong color, let's not use that. That's not going to be great. I'm going to take the total there, and I'm going to add to it these reapportioned support services there. So literally a column of 4 figures here, and I make it 4,152,270, which is going up the screen. Thanks, Claudine. Thanks, Elena. Anyone else want to drop theirs in? Perhaps someone wants to add up the other column. Perhaps you've already done it. I make it 1,627,082. What do I do? Of course, 1,627,082. Yeah, I agree. So let's just add these two totals together and check, because they should be, shouldn't they? 5,779,352. That figure should end up there, because at the top there, it was like spread between 5 centres. What we've done is taken 3 of the support centres and we've reapportioned it into the production centres. So we should have exactly the same total, 5,779,352. Boom. Great. And this will be the basis of task 4. What I would just point out to you is that this is great. And if I just take, for instance, this is a link into next week. So link to next week, okay, which looks at task 5, okay. Yep, Ramesh, it certainly is very, very important. Very, very important. Okay. Kelly says, can't tell you how happy I am. I've been going through mad with this task for weeks. Great, no worries. Hey, Kelly, just join in all the time, whenever. Come back even once you pass the exam. Hey, why not? So the link to next week is, for instance, as an example, what we would effectively then need to do is say, let's take P2. P2 has got £1,627,082 of overhead in it. What we would then need to do, this is your overhead, is we need to absorb it on a basis of activity. Okay, so when we're looking at the cost of doing something, we're going to take the overhead and divide it, work it, if you like, into what we do. And so maybe that might be mileage in an example like this. So for instance, the planned mileage for this one was 13,716. That was the planned mileage. And if I pump that into my calculator, okay, I know it's a service rather than it being, you know, a manufacturing business. But if I pump that into my calculator, let me just do it, 1,627,082, literally I'm doing it, divided by 13,716 miles. That is something like £118.63 to the nearest per mile. Okay, so literally what we're saying is, there's obviously the petrol or the fuel, great, yeah, fantastic. There's the drivers, there's all sorts of bits and pieces. Yeah, we've got the direct stuff. But then when we're saying how much does it cost us to provide the service, we're suggesting for the contract services, P2, we need to bear in mind £118.63 for every mile that we drive on those contract services, because you've got to take account of the depreciation of buses. You've got to take into account the maintenance costs, the parts storage people, the admin, etc., etc. Okay, so how much does it cost to provide a mile of a contract bus ride? Well, all right, in addition to things like the driver, £118.63 a mile. And this is what we would call an overhead absorption rate. Okay, and next week we'll look at how that works in practice. Okay, overhead absorption rate, OAR. Okay, and that's a link to next week. It's not the end for today. I do like to give you as much as possible. So to end today, look, the reapportionment of service centres to production centres, or support centres to the what we do centres, using the Timbo terminology. Direct method is where there is no reciprocal service. Okay, no reciprocal service. So the service cost centres only perform work for the production cost centres. And you saw that in the last one. Yeah, there was no crossover of that service. If there is reciprocal service, so again, we're not using that specific word here, but you'll notice that they said it in the last question. So reciprocal service. Then what we need to follow is what's called a step down method. Now, there will only ever be a situation, if they want to present it to you, if I've got service 1 and service centre 2, that one might do something for 2. Let's put in the production centres as well. So what we might be told is that service centre 1 does work for P2 and P1, and also some work for S2. Woo! But then you've got S2 only doing work for P2 and P1, nothing for S1. They'll never double reciprocate. So we would need to deal with this one first, dish it out to P1, P2 and S2, and then take lastly what's in S2 and dish it out to P2 and P1, and then everything is in P1 and P2, which is what we will have to do. Okay, and it's not difficult, and I have a petite exemplet of that for you on the second task that I dished out for this week. Okay, so let's just confirm the outcome of this, and then that's the session. So the indirect costs have been allocated and apportioned to 4 cost centres as follows: production centres, service centres, assembly, packaging, canteen and stores, whatever they want to call them, of course. Now, here are the apportioned and allocated. I'm just going to write that as well, because that's what it said here. So they've been allocated and apportioned. So hopefully you are happy with where this is. If I just link you back into the task that we just did, in this big picture, this massive one, we're basically at this point here. Yeah, they've gone through the allocation and apportionment, and we're now, if you like, sitting on this row. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So they've done all of that other stuff, and you've got those costs sitting there. Okay, now we've got this extra piece of information. Okay, and this is the, you know, the reapportionment that's about to take place. Now, the canteen, 60% of the canteen work is for the assembly, 25% of the canteen work is for the packaging, and 15% of the canteen work is actually for the other support or service centre, which is the stores. Because let's face it, what the canteen does is feed people. And there's people probably working in all of those departments, of course. Then we've got the stores department. So the stores department doesn't do anything for the canteen. Well, it doesn't know. It does 35% of its activity for the production. It does 65%. Hello, can I ask whoever's unmuted to mute themselves back up, please? Thank you very much. So you see here, there is one reciprocal. So it is the canteen that is doing something for the other 3. But then when we come to deal with the stores is just going to be doing work for these production departments. And, you know, in reality, it says show how these overheads would be reapportioned. Well, the point is, look, if you look at the order it's presented, it leads you through it. But be aware they might use or want drop downs. So you must always do the reciprocal one first. The canteen is going to drop stuff into stores. So do the canteen first. It's laying here, obviously, for us. So I'm going to just scribble the percentages in the top corner. So when we do the canteen, remember it said 60% of the canteen is going to find its way to assembly. 25% of the canteen is going to find its way into packing, and 15% is going to find its way into the stores. So here we go. Let's do the figures. There's 80 grand in the canteen. Let's take it out. Now, again, RTFQ, what do they want? Minus signs, etc. What do they want? But anyway, there we go. So 60% of 80,000, I can do that myself, but I can see you're doing it for me anyway, 48 grand. 25% of 80,000, it's a quarter of it, 20,000. 15% of 80 grand, 12 grand. Now, guys, calculate them independently, do them separately, don't put the rest or anything like that, and then check that the 48 and the 20 at 68 and the 12 is 80. So as you see, what's happening there is we're just moving it between the columns. Then we do finally reapportionment of the stores. I'll assume that they tell us to put a 0 in a box where it's relevant. Nothing's going to go in the canteen. The canteen is done. And now, of course, we're going to empty the stores and drop the relevant figures into the production departments. And the figures, percentages, as you can see at the top, 65% of stores is for assembly, 35% of stores is for packaging. Now, be careful, because you're not taking the 55 away. You're not taking 12 away. You're taking 67 out of the stores. There is now 67 after the first reapportionment. So it's 65% of the 67 that's in the stores. So I'm after whatever those figures are. Of course, indeed. So correct me if I'm wrong. 65%. Elena is going for 43,550. Okay, I will pop that figure there because I agree with it. 35% of 67 is 23,450. I agree with that as well. 43,550. Zara, Elena, Zara, yep. Okay. Oh, 77, a little bit of a finger press. No worries. Excellent. Love it. Okay. And so once, just check, of course, that it adds across. And so we add them up. And when you add these columns up, 240 plus the 48 plus the 43,550, this one, I think, comes to 331,550. The packaging has got 140 plus another 20, that's 160, plus another 23, it comes, I think, to 183,450. RTFQ, see what they want. These should be 0 because you have reapportioned them. Now then, I'm just going to do something else because I never leave without a little check. So I'm going to take the 240, the 140, the 80 and the 55, and I'm just going to add them together. 240, 380, 460, 515,000. And I'm going to double check it because I should still have 515,000 at the bottom, because all we've done is emptied 2 support services into the 2 production services. And when you add these 2 together, it is indeed 515,000. Okay. And so again, I feel comfortable that I haven't missed anything. Okie dokie. And that's it. Yeah, fantastic. The 67, you got that okay, Margot? So yeah, the 55 that was already in it, plus the 12 that came into it on the first reapportionment of the canteen. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen, folks. That's the end of what is session 1, but it doesn't really make any difference now. This is task 4. Next week, we move to look at task 5. So we will then be going to that next step that says, right, okay, how are we going to get this 331,550 into the production? What basis are we going to do it? You know, when we drop the fish into the flour, how are we going to measure how much flour should go on the fish and then how much batter should go on the fish? Okay, so for those of you that are still sitting, I'll see you next week when we'll be taking some dipped fish and frying it. Indeed. No worries. So see you all very soon. See you next week. Cheers, Jenny. No worries. Cheers, Jenna. Desislava, good. Nice to see you. Welcome to our sessions. Shelley, excellent. See you soon. Judy. Claudine. Yeah, Claudine, which PDF do you want bigger? This one? Oh, no, the other one. You were probably were you talking about that one, Claudine? Or was that the previous exercise? I may have done the wrong thing for you there. Questions? Those. So when you say make them bigger, you mean the ones that we send off to you? Unfortunately, I can't do a lot with those, to be honest. But of course, I can play with these like that, which is probably too small for you. And that's probably a bit better. Okay. Cool. Yeah, the PDFs are the PDFs. I've just cut and paste those, so I can't actually make them any bigger in terms of what gets emailed out to you. Okay. Okie dokie. Zara, see you. Thank you very much. See you soon. Erica, sorry I didn't give you a shout out when you came in. I didn't spot it, to be honest, but there you go. Nice one. Okay, everyone. Okie dokie. Cheers, Erica. Cheers, Erica. Cheers, Zara. Just seeing who's left on the screen. Margot. Yep. See you, Margot. Okie dokie. I'm still recording, so I will now switch that off. Vera, you are the last person. I'll switch off the recording just in case you wanted to ask something.